yet. I think the last time I checked, we had 44 people signed up, so that's very exciting. I hope they all come, but their loss if they don't. So, and for everyone here, I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes to give everyone a chance to log on before we get started.
She would be.
I'm just going to give it another minute or two and then we will get started. Thanks for waiting, guys. All right, Sarah, are you back? No, wait for her. Okay, amazing. I am going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for Fair Fashion's first ever sustainability panel. I am Elaine Garvey. I am a third year fashion merchandising and sustainability student here at UGA, and I also serve as the president of Fair Fashion. And our other Fair Fashion exec members are Sam and Sarah Kate that are here, and I will let them briefly introduce themselves.
Hi guys, I'm Sara Kate. I'm also a third year at UGA studying fashion merchandising and sustainability and getting the environmental ethics certificate. I'm a co-blog content editor of Fair Fashion UGA. My other blog content editor could not make it tonight. Her name is Elizabeth and she is missed, but we will be recording this so that our other exec members can see it.
And I'm Sam. I'm a first year linguistics major. We'll see where I go with that. And I serve as the social media manager for Fair Fashion.
And our co-vice presidents, Morgan Young and Alex Escorbano, could not be here today. But anyways, we're gonna go ahead and get started. I am, of course, so glad everyone could make it. And I just wanted to once again thank our incredible panelists who are taking time out of their very busy schedules to attend this event with us. And it was very important for us to hold this event during Fashion Revolution Week. And as many of you may know or may not know, this week is Fashion Revolution Week, which is held on the anniversary of the Rana Plaza collapse, which was a tragedy that killed over 1,000 garment workers in Bangladesh. And Fashion Revolution Week is being held to come together as a global community to create a better fashion industry for the people and the planet. And I know Sanni knows about that, and she's having some of her designers at Community participate in the Who Made My Clothes campaign, which is super awesome. And that ties directly into what we will be talking about today, which is of course sustainable fashion. And without further ado, I would love if each of our panelists could briefly introduce themselves and give a little history of their career, and anyone can go first.
I can go first. I'm Sanni Baumgartner, and I'm the owner of Community, a boutique for sustainable fashion and locally made goods in downtown Athens. And I came to actually UGA as an exchange student in the late 90s from Germany. I was a musician at the time and connected with the Athens music scene. And after I got my degree from Germany, I decided to move here permanently. And lived the Athens music life for about 10 years, had a few bands, and to support myself during that time, while I wasn't really making money playing music, I started selling vintage clothing, and that grew kind of organically into providing an income for me. So I started out selling at renting a booth at Atomic, a vintage mall, and kind of grew it from there until I decided to take the plunge and open my own store in 2010, so 10 years, almost 11 years ago. My focus was sustainability and supporting local makers. And so we have our own clothing line called Community Service that's made from vintage and sustainable fabrics. So mainly we redesign vintage clothing and work with vintage materials. And then we also are a place for local designers to get together and learn from each other, and feature like an incubator for local designers and local makers to kind of support the local fashion scene.
Awesome. Yeah, I know Sanni is the best from personal experience, and I have the pleasure of being a sales associate at Community that I love. If you're in Athens, you should definitely come see me on the weekends.
Well, I guess I can go next. So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this. I feel like it's impressive that we all have Zoom fatigue, and yet you decided to continue being on Zoom. So props to that. But my name is Sara Idacavage. I graduated from UGA in the fashion merchandising program way back in 2009. So shout out to all the fashion merchandising students who are here today. And after I graduated, I moved to New York City and worked in fashion journalism. And then I got my master's degree at Parsons School of Design. And after that, I fell in love with fashion history, and I started teaching a variety of classes on fashion history, culture, textiles across Parsons, FIT, and Pratt, in addition to working on some museums and archives. And then I kind of eventually hit a point where I was not done with teaching fashion history, but I was wondering if there was something more to it. And I've always been passionate about sustainability. And I started to question, is there a role for fashion history in sustainable pedagogy? And that led me to coming to Athens again. So here I am in my house. And so after spending 11 years in New York City, I am back in Athens as a PhD student in the Textiles, Merchandising, and Interiors program, where I get to work with fantastic students like Elaine. I'm just really excited to be on this panel. Thank you so much for having me.
I can go next. So Sarah and I actually met in New York City, but and I'm very grateful to her for bringing me into this panel. I'm delighted to join all of you tonight. My path into fashion was very, unexpected. I grew up in a rural small town in Maine where fashion was the last thing on the agenda. LL Bean was sort of the pinnacle of fashion where I grew up. And I ended up moving out to LA when I was a teenager, and then working in the modeling industry, and didn't love it, and then returned to college and was just very lucky to have a professor who let me know that I could study fashion as a academic topic. So that put me on this path to studying fashion from a critical theory and history point. And over time, my interest really started to evolve around these issues of labor, how all of the different players in the fashion system are impacted and interdependent. And so my kind of focus in fashion, I teach now, and I also do organizing work around fashion labor issues. So that's where I'm at, and I'm coming from Brooklyn. So hello from up north.
Hi there. I guess that leaves me, right? My name is Kim Woods, and I own Willaby, which is a brand of GOTS certified organic home textiles focused on women and children. All of our products are made from GOTS certified organic gauze. I thought I was going to be a lawyer and went to law school a number of years ago now. But I had really always been interested in art and design. And when I got to law school, I decided to leave shortly thereafter to go to art school at the Museum of Fine Art School in Boston. I focused on painting and drawing, but I was always sewing and making something out of fabric when I should have been was supposed to be spending more time in the painting studio. So it was always a personal passion of mine. I come from a long line of quilters. I grew up in rural Ohio. I think that a lot of my passion for sustainability from seed to finished product comes from being a farmer's daughter, understanding that whole cycle now from beginning to end, and growing up in a pesticide laden community, and later on thinking about what that meant for me and my family and whatnot. So we're based in Athens. We've been online since 2014. We do not have a brick and mortar. We do fulfillment and shipping from our location in Athens. And we have interns from the UGA fashion merchandising department every year. Elaine is one of them that we're blessed to have. And along the way, I was an art teacher, so I enjoy working with students and sharing knowledge along the way. So I'm excited to be a part of this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for those amazing introductions. I'm not going to waste any time. We're just going to dive right in. So my first question I have for everyone is, what led you to become interested in sustainability, and what does sustainability mean to you? And everyone is welcome to answer, and anyone can start.
I'll go ahead and start. I did mention the community that I grew up in, and being in a farming community and seeing the use of pesticides, and that just being my normal, but then becoming more educated and understanding the impact that that may have had upon my health or the health of the people in my community. I think that I always carried that with me, and combined with my interest in textiles, it just sort of happened that way, that I started to sell things made of GOTS certified organic cotton. So sustainability is just really important to me because it means health. It means health of not only the planet, but people. I have a son, and a part of the reason also for starting my business was because I wanted the very best for him. I felt that it was really important to keep everything pure and non-toxic in his environment. I started making blankets that I thought I would have loved for him to have had when he was a newborn. He was a little bit older at the point when I started making all of the swaddles and things that he would have used, but it was based on the things that I felt like I would have wanted, but I couldn't. There weren't a lot of GOTS certified organic options at the time that I had him. And you said, what does sustainability mean to me, right? Okay, so sustainability means to me from beginning to end, all points of the process. So that means from the materials that I use to make my products, it means that they've been farmed in a safe and toxin-free manner. It means that during the manufacturing process, the least amount of chemicals have been used, and that the people who are involved in the manufacturing or the harvesting, the manufacturing, whatever from beginning to end are treated well, and that their health is also considered. So we're not only thinking about the quality of the end product, but we're thinking about the people who are involved and what they're exposed to in the process, the farmers, again, the farmers, the people who are weaving, dyeing, sewing, what have you. And of course that those people who are involved are being treated well.
I'll build off of what Kim was saying, because that exact arc of work and pathway of making in fashion is exactly where my sort of original interest in sustainability stemmed from, but then also where I feel like I'm constantly rediscovering new areas for exploration. I think when I started learning how much I didn't know about the value chain of fashion, that's when I got really interested in what is called sustainability, like this general umbrella term for all of this idea of ethical and responsible production. And I think especially that there are so many hidden people in the value chain. I think very rarely does the consumer think about the farmer, and even more rarely, sort of all of the other players across the whole value chain. And there's a really cool project in the Carolinas that's called the 10,000 Pounds of Cotton Project, that's working to bring back the whole value chain of cotton production. And they use the term dirt to shirt as their kind of messaging. And that idea that, if the farmer is sort of in a systemic structural position where they can't farm the way they want, so they're having to use GMO seeds or really heavy pesticide processes, and then they can't even set the price that they want to sell the cotton for, and they're in debt before they even, see any plants growing. And then all the way along the line, there are so many opportunities for abuses. I think that the transparency piece is where I see a huge opportunity for us to build back like a better fashion system, because it's become this unsustainable beast because of all of these kind of hidden workers and hidden players along the way. So that's been my, these real ups and downs, highs and lows of moments where it just feels almost overwhelming and hopeless and too big to solve. And then other times where I realize how much, projects like that 10,000 pounds of cotton can create interventions to start to change the way that we consume. So yeah.
Yeah, I want to kind of tag onto that too. I'm really interested in the regional sustainable supply chain, which I think is kind of maybe an idealistic approach at the moment, but I think that if we can move a little closer to that again, that would solve a lot of the issues that have been created by being so disconnected from who makes our clothing and how the clothes are being made. And so I think that that causes so many issues that I think can, by making the process, by bringing it basically closer to the consumer again and making it more visible and more accessible, that can really increase sustainability. And I think that for me, like aside from the the environmental factors of sustainability with clothing production and the ethical treatment of workers, I think also the impact on the local economy is part of sustainability for me. And that, by keeping part of the production here, all of the production here, like that, farm to closet approach, or what did you call it? Dirt to shirt? I like that.
Dirt to shirt.
I think it supports the local economy as well. It makes it more stable. Like right now, with having all these, all the big companies that are global, I think it's also, we're becoming so dependent on them, and they have so much power because of that, that by having smaller companies and more local production, we can support the local economy as well and keep more money here, have more transparency, and just more access to kind of monitoring how things are being made. So that's kind of like the idealistic approach for me, but I'm definitely an idealist, because I think that's, you know, how we're kind of getting motivated to make some things happen. So that's definitely what sustainability, like that's part of it for me as well.
Yeah, and I figured I'd go last because I've got some issues with the term sustainability, and I'm trying to figure them out in my head. So I wanted to hear everybody else's first, but you know, I'm approaching this not necessarily from a material or a practitioner side. I'm coming at it from a sociology and history type of angle. And so just the idea of the concept of sustainability being the sociocultural idea, right? And so it means one thing now, it's going to mean something different 5 years from now. And I am at this point in my PhD career where I'm reading up to 10 different academic journal articles about this topic a day, which is mind-numbing, by the way. And every single one defines it differently. And they all have these different takes. I'm mostly looking at public policy, economics, environmental science, things like this. But I feel like one definition that keeps coming up is this idea of meeting the needs of today, and you know, also meeting the needs of future generations. And I have problems with this because, you know, whose needs, right? Is this the needs of the global north? Is this the needs of the global south, if you want to use those terms, right? Because like maybe I need a new pair of sneakers, but there's someone else who needs clean water. So I feel like that is sort of a almost like a greenwashy way to even approach this. So then I started thinking about it being ethical and wanting to care about other people and the environment. But then I kind of realized that you could be like a terrible person, like a serial killer, and still do sustainable things, right? So I've been trying to work out in my head what this is. And I feel like I've kind of come to this point where I see it as an ideology. It's a way of looking at the world and recognizing that there are limits, that we are in a finite amount of resources. And so I'm kind of starting to feel like this, it's like this paradigm shift or this ontological shift of looking at what is reality. You know, like all of a sudden the earth isn't flat, it's round. I think we're all kind of looking like, oh, wait a minute, growth has its limits, right? And so I've just been kind of almost conceptualizing in a way akin to like spirituality, because there's so many different ways to define spirituality. People practice it different. You could be an Orthodox Jew, you could be, you know, a Muslim, you could be someone who believes in, you know, spirits and objects and nature. And you're all kind of believing in a higher power, but you're approaching it differently. So that's sort of the closest I've gotten to a definition lately, but I feel like, you know, by 9 p.m. tonight, I'll have a different definition. So who knows? That's all.
Yeah, Sarah, I absolutely love how you put that, because sustainability will never be something that just has one definition. It's completely nuanced and complex, and is changing every single day. So I could not agree more with how you put that. But my next question is, how do you believe sustainability translates into the fashion and textile industry?
I will jump in on that because I love, Sarah, what you just said about sustainability as spirituality, because I feel like one of my favorite sort of environmental activist journalists her name's Mary Haglar, and she wrote this piece called "I Work in the Environmental Movement and I Don't Care If You Recycle." And I feel like it speaks to this idea that we treat our consumption as this this very kind of spiritual, sinful, or a redemptive process. And I think what's really interesting about how sustainability, or whatever the term is, but these more general concepts, how that sits in the industry is ultimately that the fashion industry is this sort of exemplar of capitalism, and it is going to respond to things that that feed that system. And so the Business of Fashion, for example, put out their kind of annual report on this, what they're calling the sustainability gap. And one of the things that they noted was that annual reports from these Fortune 500 companies and also major global fashion brands, they're using sustainability as a keyword in their annual reports as often as they're using the word profit. So all of a sudden, sustainability has taken on this very attractive and very, sexy meaning in that world. And I think about how just a few years ago, really, if you tried to talk about the environmental impact of fashion in the, hallowed halls of these fashion publications or major brands, it was the least attractive thing. It was so uncool, unsexy, whatever, to talk about these things. But I think that there is room now that there's some awareness, at least, of these issues, to start to use that as a lever, like knowing the system that we're in and using that as a lever within the industry that inherently has these kind of structural systems in place to extract and to exploit. And I think it's an awareness of that when fashion gets a little too cozy with sustainability, which is definitely what I've been seeing happening over the past few years. I don't know if that answers the question, but that was what popped into mind as you shared that.
Elaine, I know you're like kind of guiding these questions, but I was looking at the document that we have, and I feel like that's actually a good segue into like the conscious consumption like section. We can continue like the questions that we were on.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Sarah Kate, go ahead.
No, I just feel like what Tessa said was like a really good point when you were mentioning that now it's like almost sustainability almost goes hand in hand with profit for a lot of companies. Specifically, I think like fast fashion corporations that have been greenwashing and have been promoting this idea of sustainability where it's really just something that shows up in their reports, but it just is like maybe a shirt that they drop that they say is made out of, less chemical than the shirt that they dropped the day before. So I think that was just like a really interesting point that you made. And some of the questions that we have coming up just revolve around how consumers could be more conscious with things like that. So I just thought that was really interesting. I like what you said on that, Tessa. Elaine,
sorry, I don't want to take up too much floor space, but I do just want to follow one thing on that point that you just mentioned, Sarah Kate, of like that there is, I think, and why I love that article of, I don't care if you recycle, is because I think the personal choice fallacy is huge when it comes to fashion and sustainability. This idea that we can like sort of shop our way out of the climate crisis, or we can shop our way out of global poverty and inequity. I personally don't think that's true. And I think that what is actually true is, and what's said in this article by Mary Heglar, this journalist, is what really needs to be happening is not treating this as, self-flagellation and sin, that we're shopping and we feel guilty about it. We use Amazon and we feel guilty, but instead holding these massive companies accountable to fix these things. Because when they make, as you said, Sarah Kate, like if they change one SKU, just in terms of how they dye their fabric, that could have such impact across a whole waterway ecosystem. Whereas an individual person choosing to buy one shirt over another, just that scale of impact is so different. So I think it is, it's just a very slippery position we're in right now, where there's a lot of very powerful messaging that's going out. And I think as consumers, it's on us to be very critical and very conscious, but not to sort of translate that into some kind of shopping responsibility or superpower even. Like we can't solve this alone.
Yes.
Yeah, Tessa, that's an amazing point. And I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I know I want to bring Sarah into this conversation because I think she'll have a really insightful comment on this. Because I know, especially now when sustainability is such kind of like a hot topic, that a lot of it can be placed on consumers, and a lot of the blame is placed on consumers, that it is your responsibility to shop more sustainably and lower your carbon footprint and your emissions and what have you, when really, I mean, it is the fault of these enormous corporations. But then at the same time, it's like, that's not to say that you personally can't do better. So I would love to hear what Sarah has to say about that.
Thank you so much. Elaine only knows I have things to say because I've spoken to her about this before in private conversations. But everything that Tessa said, I'm 100% in agreement with. And I think you kind of have to put this in the context of neoliberalism today and what consumers are expected to add to the economy. And there is a sociologist named Elizabeth Shove, who I sort of worship because she does the most amazing work at kind of putting things into context of, who is benefiting when we're saying consumers should make more ecological decisions, then these are all the power structures that benefit from that. So this is something I think about. I don't even know if I have anything terribly more to add other than the fact that I think it also sort of challenges the idea of the sovereign consumer. I think we're all kind of programmed within capitalism, which is not, capitalism can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. But at the end of the day, you're thinking about consumers having some sort of individual decision making, but it's so much more complex than that. I don't think I could even get into that in an hour, right? But I think that just we don't necessarily want to break away from that mindset, because that is a powerful belief, the sovereign consumer. And so in order to challenge that, you're breaking down so many structures that are really, it's tough to tackle. So I don't know, this is the stuff that keeps me up at night, everyone. Like, this is why I don't even know what to say.
No, I think both of you, Sarah and Tessa, put that really well. And it is just such an insane and complex issues that it would take us years to go through. But with that being said, I would like to dive more into that topic a little bit. And one of our questions we have here is, with all of that being said, yes, it is not completely the role of the consumer, but also on the other hand, yes, there are things like individual actions that we can all do that do have an impact. And that leads me to my next question, which is how do you believe that the average consumer can be more sustainable with what is in their wardrobe?
I think there's a lot of things that people can do. A lot of what sustainability is just doing with less, I think, and me as a store owner to say that is always a little challenging because I'm depending on people to buy. But I trust that, if you follow these principles of buy less, buy better quality, make it last, take care of your clothing, that I believe that will continue to support or even increase my business, because this is what we're offering at Community already. But I think that, that everybody can, have a relationship with your articles of clothing that is meaningful. And I think part of that is, sometimes spending a little more money on it, because then you're also valuing it more than if you get something, for $5 somewhere. You might be treating it better. You might really care for it more. And I think that, by investing in some key pieces that are timeless, and then maybe thrifting like the really fun stuff and be creative with styling, I think you can make items last. You can still have a really fun wardrobe that you can use for self-expression. Like fashion is so the fun thing to do is to be able to make it personal. But I think that it doesn't have to all be expensive, and I think you can really be creative with it. And if you make it last, then those more expensive pieces end up costing you the same or less than if you buy a bunch of really cheap stuff that doesn't last long. And then the other thing that I think is important is that we know how to take care of our clothes in terms of mending, repairing. We do alterations and repair at Community, and that's part of it too, that we want to allow people to get more out of the pieces that they already own, if it's in terms of changing the fit or even the style to adapt it to some new trends. You can do a lot with alterations and then also repairs, and then that way, again, you make it last longer, you wear it longer, and you buy less, and then that way it's overall more sustainable.
I'll go ahead and jump in. I do have a thought following up on what we were talking about previously, and just the idea that it may sound idealistic, but I do think that consumers can have a significant impact. And I look at the large companies, why are they even interested in sustainability? I don't think it's just because they care about doing the right thing. I think it's because they think that that's what consumers want, and consumers do want that more now. And I do think that with the choices that we make, we are creating we are creating an influence and an impact on by I guess our behavior. There are companies studying our behavior and what people are trending towards. And if we start trending towards things that are more sustainable, then sustainability is going to become more important to more companies. And I think that this is something that started with smaller companies. And we have to keep doing the right thing, and consumers have to keep making the right choices, and hopefully therefore, influencing things up the ladder. But I think everything that Sanni said, I think, buy less, buy better, educate yourself on fabric. And Elaine has heard me talk about this in the studio. I think that there are a lot of people who don't really understand fabric. They don't understand the sort of qualities of different fabrics and why I could choose this fabric over something synthetic. I think being careful about choosing clothing that is not made of synthetic materials. And if it is, buy from a company that uses recycled synthetic materials like Patagonia, for example. Or if you need something made of synthetic materials, go thrift it. And I'm not saying like everybody has to be perfect. I'm not, I don't thrift every swimsuit that I wear or what have you. But if you can make the choice if you can challenge yourself to buy non-synthetic and buy organic whenever possible, I think I think it's really important.
Yeah, I completely agree, Kim. And I felt like this kind of connected with another question we had, which is what roles do accessibility and privilege play into fashion consumption? Because I feel like right now there's a large discussion going on of kind of like two different sides of sustainable fashion. And one of them being sustainable fashion is about buying these super high quality, timeless, like more expensive pieces that are going to last you your entire life. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but that does often come at a higher price point due to the quality of materials and the quality of labor that is being used to make that product. And then on the other hand, it's like sustainability really is buying old, borrowing, secondhand, mending, or just not buying anything at all. So I just think that is a very kind of complex issue that all of us are navigating. And I don't think it's 100% one way or the other. But to go back to the question was, how do accessibility and privilege play into fashion consumption?
I love talking about this. And I'd love to hear what you all have to say. So cost is something that I think is challenging. So, we do two things. We redesign vintage clothing, which means we have existing pieces, and then with small changes, we modernize it. So there's very little, there's some labor involved, but it's not that much because, we don't make things from scratch. When we do make things from scratch, there's a lot of labor involved. And easily, we're at a price point of 150, 250 and up with handmade pieces. And this is like small scale production made in Athens, ethical treatment of workers, but it's really hard to keep it affordable. Even a simple t-shirt. I mean, it's just it's hard to do that. But at the same time, you're talking about, who can afford that, and how, in terms of sustainability, like really the biggest impact we can have is when everybody can afford it. But I think some issues that I see here is, so for one thing, let's say, 50 years ago, and Sarah and Tessa might know much more about this, but people spend a lot more on clothing in terms of percentage of their income. They had a clothing budget, like we have a budget for, maybe rent or bills of food, which I don't know who still has that, because we're so used to everything being so cheap. We don't even have a budget for clothing, like how, so I think there's one thing that's makes it difficult to afford the more expensive pieces, because we don't actually plan for it at all. And then the other thing is that the fast fashion has pushed down prices so much for clothing that we just like we're so used now to these really cheap clothes that are made a certain way overseas with people not getting paid a lot of money, it seems so high to buy a sustainable piece. Like in comparison, it's not like 20% more or something, but it's like 3 times as much or more than that. And so I think that's, how do we solve that problem? Like where do we come back up with the expectation of what something should cost? And also how can a lot of people afford that? Like, I think that's like my biggest challenge as a sustainable brand that wants to do everything right and wants to produce things locally, that I feel like it's hard for me to find a big customer base for that, especially in Athens. That is, of course, lots of students, not a lot of professional women, I would say in their 30s, 40s, 50s, which would be probably a lot of a customer that would enjoy what we're doing, but Athens doesn't have that demographic really very much. And so we're trying to keep it affordable as much as we can, but at the same time, I think it's important to figure out a way of supporting sustainable brands like, Willaby and like that are doing everything right. And if we're not supporting these efforts, then I think we're not really helping to grow this into something that maybe become more affordable when it grows into a larger scale. So I'm kind of curious to hear your all's thought on that.
Well, I'm just so excited that you mentioned the percentage of income going towards clothing, because something I have right here is a whole lot of home economics textbooks ranging from the 1920s to the 1970s. P.S. the 70s one looks amazing. And all of these books are so specific with the directions they give women. They're like, you need to spend this much on your one daughter, this much on this. Every year, your coat should cost $45. And if your husband makes this amount of bracket, then you get to have a dress at this bracket of money. It's so specific, and no one ever taught me how to shop. And of course, these books are written for well-to-do, typically white women who could afford to go to college during these times. But I have been doing some content analysis with this, trying to figure out where we've lost this sort of idea, or how these ideas are formed. And then also looking at the US Department of Agriculture records, because they used to go to people's doors and knock and be like, how many pieces of clothing do you have? And they kept these records, and there was a lot being published about it. And then in the 60s and the 70s, it just stops. You can't find wardrobe planning, academic journal writing past that. So that's something I'm trying to also figure out and bring that back in. But I think that, when you're talking about accessibility and income and stuff, we also cannot ignore the elephant in the room, which is colonialism and the fact that we are all white women on this panel. And so much of what is going wrong with the fashion industry is that sort of, the repercussions aren't being put on us. Athens, Georgia, we have beautiful, lush trees and everything. There are people in other areas of the world who are paying for the fast fashion consumption I've done. So I do think you also have to both think, what can people afford and buy here in our world, or, our little tiny bit of the world, but then also how are these things doing like a butterfly effect, elsewhere. And if we can sort of focus on degrowth in the global north, there's going to be a lot less stress on this. I don't really love the global north, global south, but that is, a easy way to kind of talk about it. That's all.
I think also what you said, Sanni, about sort of this resetting the expectation of what things cost, I think, echoes what Sarah was sharing as well, that we've sort of, opened this Pandora's box of cheap, easy, thoughtless consumption. And so we need to recalibrate that whole system. And I think the timeline as well, Sarah, that you were bringing up of this 60s, 70s transition away from it, it makes a lot of sense, because that was the, precursor of the globalization shift that ultimately was sort of, pivoted with NAFTA, and like as we sort of escaped our own backyards and production systems. But anyway, I was just sort of thinking, Sarah and I have a shared love of department stores, and department stores as these like hubs of consumption are really interesting to me, because it was one of the, especially if you look like late 19th century, early 20th century, there was such transparency in cost in a way that, because of this idea of pricing as almost like a new concept, pricing was something that was really put forward in the marketing and in the messaging. And so I teach at Pratt Institute, and Pratt used to host in that same time period, late 19th, early 20th century, these like budget fashion shows that were put on in tandem with like Wanamaker's department store or Abraham and Straus, these big department stores in New York. And they would all be about breaking down the cost of a look and breaking down the cost of the garment. And I think it's encouraging to me in some ways, because it reminds me that the system we have now is a relatively new system that we have built, and like, kind of thoughtlessly followed this path in some ways, because this production model of like mass oversupply that then gets shipped around the globe and gets kind of overdyed and like produced en masse and then burned or landfilled, like that is really only the past few decades. So it's not that fashion has always been this, and it's not that this is the way it sort of as a natural law exists. This is a relatively recent phenomenon, and that means that there's a lot of room to undo. And I think especially with the work, Sanni, that you do, it's really exciting, because one of the future potentials that I see is returning to a more traditional practice of fashion making, where it's made for each body, where it's made to need, and where fashion is not just product, but it's also service. It's also like delivering a knowledge, and that in itself being valued. And I think that's part of that like recalibration that needs to happen. But yes, I mean, I'm so glad, Elaine, that you asked this question on inclusivity, because I think it's one of those huge areas that, as brands start to become comfortable with talking about environmental impact, they are still very uncomfortable talking about labor impact. And I think they're even more uncomfortable talking about issues of identity and race and body inclusivity. And it's just, again, this is a relatively new system of the standardized body. Like that wasn't the norm throughout most of our fashion history. So I feel like it's, yeah, in some ways I have this like tentative optimism where I feel like this is a new phenomenon. This is a new mistake that we have made. So we have history to go back to rethink it, at least.
Yeah, Tessa, I absolutely loved how you put that. And that kind of, I'm going to slightly pivot, I guess. That leads me into the next question. As we're talking about kind of even though the fashion industry, the modern day fashion industry as we know it, is relatively new, it has done an enormous amount of damage to not only the planet, but the people that are working within that industry. And as you said, we are also, like business owners such as Sanni and Kim, are learning what they can do to be more sustainable and how to use less and how to make products that last longer. And with that question, I guess this is more, again, targeted towards Sanni and Kim. What has been a challenging aspect of working with sustainability and trying to incorporate that into your business? And what challenges have you faced along that path?
Gosh. Well, one thing just in particular comes to mind, and that is use of materials, making sure that every bit of the fabric is used. That's something that we constantly strive for, and currently we are achieving. But I will say that, so we have some of our production located in India. Well, our fabric is made in India, and then some of our sewing takes place in India. The majority of our sewing takes place near Atlanta. There, I'm able, in that situation, I have a close relationship with my production team. I've worked with them for a number of years, and we're on the same page of using every bit of fabric that we possibly can. And However, when things are made abroad, I am not able to be right there monitoring the situation. And we just recently encountered what I think was probably a good bit of wastage, but I don't know the extent of it. And that's really hard when, you know, I do define myself as a zero waste company. So I think, like, just in my particular situation, if I'm not producing locally with a team of people that, you know, I've developed a relationship with and everything, it's that becomes much harder to monitor. In terms of being sustainable right now at this time in history, specific to COVID, a lot of organic farmers are not farming the crop that they were prior to COVID. For one reason or another, there's a shortage of cotton yarn, but there's also a huge shortage of organic cotton yarn. And so, you know, I'm still trying to understand all of the reasons why around that. But so right now, accessibility to that is a little bit challenging, and that's something that I'm currently just trying to figure out. I think that it was a lot harder to be sustainable when I made clothing, because it was a lot harder to, first of all, find organic in every kind of weight and fiber that I wanted. It's a lot easier to be sustainable if I'm using only 2 different kinds of organic cotton gauze for everything that I make. So that was a choice that I made towards sustainability. Not making clothing was a choice that I made towards sustainability. Not that you can't make clothing sustainably, but I didn't love the wastage that inevitably occurred with having to cut things like that on the bolt. I like squares and rectangles, and I can make anything out of a square and rectangle. I can make a scrunchie with this much fabric left. So yeah, that was a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but there's a lot of that goes on every day in the studio. Elaine knows because she's here.
Well, for me, I think aside from the challenge in terms of, you know, being a sustainable business, aside from the price point that we just talked about, has probably been sourcing also. So we mostly use vintage clothing that we either source from thrift stores, or that's a vintage wholesale company in Atlanta that I shop at that just pre-selects vintage already. But that, you know, we have certain designs that we could sell a lot more of, but then I can't find enough of it. So there's that limitation of finding enough of the high quality materials that we like to work with, like silk and linen and cashmere and, you know, natural fibers. And then since we are a clothing brand, it's also we're trying to have a cohesive aesthetic with our collections every season, and so there's a limit for me to find enough of certain things that we can really scale up to a point where we can be in a lot of different stores. And then when I try to source fabrics that are regionally sustainably made, then I ran into a lot of roadblocks right there. So a few years ago, a group that I was part of called the Athens Fashion Collective put on an event in Athens that was called Georgia Zone. And what it was, or the idea behind it was that we wanted to find what's left of the garment industry or the textile industry in Georgia and try to connect it to designers like, you know, Atlanta, or just up and coming younger designers that were interested in sustainability and sourcing regionally. And as we were, you know, doing our research to see who we can invite to this event to participate, we realized that much of the supply chain has gone and it's just not there anymore. And so there, you know, there's still a lot of cotton grown in Georgia. There's still cotton gins that do the first step of cleaning the cotton. But past that, basically all of it gets shipped overseas to the cotton mills there to be made into fabric. And most of it gets sewn also overseas. But if there is any kind of production, part of the production happening in the US, and it's usually the last part, which is the sewing part. But there's just so many missing pieces to get from, like, you know, the farm to closet, like this whole process where you use Georgia grown cotton and it's processed here and woven into fabric and then gets made into clothing, that was just not existent anymore. And so that has been my biggest challenge so far. And I'd love to, you know, with the Georgia Sewn event, you know, we were able to find like some smaller producers of local wool, for example. So I knitted some local wool sweaters for our fashion show, and that was really cool. But fabric itself is really hard to find. And so that I would love to work on some projects in that way, to, even if it's like, you know, collaboration with UGA, or just, I feel like more like bigger than community needs to be on that. Like I feel like for what I'm doing and what I'm able to do, it's not, I feel like it needs to have a bigger group involved that has more influence. But I would love to work on something that really reconnects what's still there and tries, even if it's for a UGA project or something, or like just a art exhibition, but like making, you know, jeans from start to finish with Georgia cotton, or t-shirts. That would be really exciting to me. But right as it is, it's really hard for me to source regional sustainable materials.
Yeah, that's kind of a dream of mine, Sanni, is to like be able to.
You were part of that event, right?
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm, yeah, to be able to have everything done here in Georgia, start to finish. I just think that that would be incredible. It would be amazing. I know that Alabama Channon, I think that she was milling cotton.
She has done it. Like they grew their own cotton, they processed it all. It was all, but I think because of, I'm not sure why, but like I think it was a challenging process, and so I think they did it more also as like it can be done. We want to show it. We want to try it out. But I don't think that's. I don't think it turned into what their main source of material has become.
Mhm.
I just want to quickly echo what you were saying, Sanni, about kind of the role of community versus some of these larger forces that are available. And I shared that 10,000 pounds of cotton project, which is in North Carolina, but is also kind of like regionally trying to rebuild a supply chain, because I think that is exactly the case. Like smaller, more agile brands or individuals or community initiatives, the burden ends up falling on those folks to do the proof of concept and show that it can be done. But then the next step is really to get it scaled up. And I mean, I think often to get government investment to make it real, because those are the types of budgets. And also going back to what Sarah was saying, like the Department of Agriculture is where so much of our fashion history is recorded. So this farm and fashion connection, it makes so much sense for the Department of Agriculture to invest in a more healthy domestic fashion farming system. But I think we're at the stage where it's more like agile prototypes and then trying to advocate for real investment.
So I just want one quick thing to add to that, because I'm not sure if you are all familiar with Kate Fletcher, who is this leader in sustainable education. I think she's been doing it for a few decades, and she and another activist named Matilda Tam had come up with the Earth Logic plan, and I just put a link in the chat. It's a free PDF book, and it's everything that you three were just saying. So I figured that kind of helps also to put in the context. She's basically making a proposal for a new economic plan where businesses like Sanni's and Kim's would thrive. And so the Earth Logic plan is the opposite of economic logic. It's saying that you're using the limitations of the earth. And in this book, they really go through play by play, like what would this mean for the government? What would this mean for consumers? So please check it out in the chat. I don't work for her, she doesn't pay me, but it would make me very happy if every person at this event would at least just check it out, because it's very inspiring.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah and Tessa, for putting those links in the chat. I personally will definitely be checking those out. As we are nearing the end of our time here, I completely understand if anyone has to go, but I would greatly appreciate it if any of our panelists would be able to stay on a bit longer to answer any questions. At this time, I would like to open the floor to any attendees who would have any questions for any of our panelists. You are welcome to turn on your camera and go off mute and ask away.
Hi, thank you guys so much for coming to speak to us today. I really enjoyed this event. I feel like sustainability panels aren't really put on a whole lot, and Elaine, this has been amazing. I'm really glad that you guys did this. But I was just wondering, I guess, in terms of like starting for like big companies to look at how to become more sustainable, just like what are the different avenues or like the starting place of where like companies and people should start to look for avenues to become more sustainable?
Do you mean, Tara, just to clarify, do you mean like how a company itself could make changes, like the first point to make a change, or do you mean more like as an individual entering the industry, or both?
I guess both, really, yeah.
I mean, the first thing I would say is that so often what I hear from folks in the industry, and definitely what my experience was in the industry, is that some of that pressure and what ultimately results in change usually comes from just someone stepping up and making their voice heard. And often it is like I don't know how many of you know Fab Scrap, that's based up here in Brooklyn, in New York, but they're a textile recycling organization, and their founder, Jess Schreiber, has told me that basically the way they got every single one of the major brands, like they work with, Marc Jacobs and Michael Kors and all of these, big New York brands, is because an intern said, like, have you heard of Fab Scrap? We should use Fab Scrap. So I feel like as individuals, I think it's very much about pushing the conversation in whatever sphere you have. And then on the brand side, to me, the first step is transparency. I feel like this perfectionism around sustainability is so counterproductive, because it means that people, but also companies, kind of shut down and don't want to share what's not going perfectly. And inevitably it's not going to be perfect, because there isn't really a way to produce a garment fully sustainably, because we're using resources to make these objects. But I think the first step is the gathering of the information and the making that information available, because then at least there's a baseline to start moving in a direction. And that's definitely where I feel like the brands that have done it well is with that level of like, we're not perfect, but here's where we're at, and being open about that.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that response, Tessa. I could not agree more with kind of the idea of eliminating the stigma that exists around having to be a perfectionist when considering sustainable fashion. And because, like you said, there is really no thing as truly sustainable fashion, because at the end of the day, creating anything new is resource intensive. I would like to give a moment if anyone else would like to ask a question. I personally have a couple of my own questions I'd like to ask. I guess, oh, I see Caroline is raising her hand, so I will give it.
Caroline, I think you got it. Maybe you go ahead, Elaine, and then if she can.
Okay, I don't know if she's maybe having some technical difficulties, but I would love to ask, since I feel like we were talking a lot about kind of the negative sides of the industry, I want to get some like positive energy in here. So what do you guys think is next for like sustainable efforts in the fashion industry, and like what efforts companies are making with, whether that be with technology or what have you, to become more sustainable.
I think as we're learning more about like the microplastics and pollution, I'm kind of seeing more awareness about natural fibers again, that we hopefully move away from, you know, a lot of polyester and you know, oil-based fibers and more towards natural fibers. I kind of see hemp maybe as a possibility for becoming a big trend in the future, since it's such a sustainable plant. And yeah, I would love, I mean, I don't know if it's happening, but I think that could be a big thing coming.
I think that the desire for organic baby clothing and blankets is just going to continue to grow. I mean, I just see way more companies making with organic cotton for baby than even like 5 years ago. I don't know how that will, I don't know if that will spread into adult clothing more. I doubt that it will as much. But within my industry, I see that becoming more and more prevalent. So I'm really excited about that. I also feel like people are caring more about using natural products for their fabric care. And we have to be really careful about that, because a lot of companies claim that their ingredients are natural or biodegradable, and they're not. But you know, that's a component of sustainability, like not just how things are produced and then you get them, but how you care for them, how often you are even washing them. You don't have to wash your clothes as often or your bedding as often as you think you need to. And you can wash it with simple Arm & Hammer washing soda and grated Castile soap, or just simple Arm & Hammer washing soda. So those two things I'm really hopeful about. And yeah, I think that those are around for a good while.
Yeah, absolutely. As we have gone a little bit over time, I don't want to keep anyone too much longer, but I would like to ask our panelists if you have any little short tips, any advice for students who are going into the industry and are interested in sustainability.
All right, two quick things. One, don't believe in recycling for the most part. When I was a fast fashion addict, it was always like, well, I'm going to take it to Goodwill and I'm going to do this. And I think we're all kind of coming to terms with the fact that that has a lot of limitations. There are people like, you know, Sanni and Kim who can work within systems where things are recycled, but for the most part, don't buy things thinking it's going to be recycled. And two, don't shame other people, because you're not mad at them, you're mad at the system, right? And so I am so, and actually to speak to your hopeful kind of question, what makes me hopeful are you guys, everyone in this chat room, in the Zoom room who is part of the Fair Fashion. The fact that when Tessa and I were in like high school and stuff, I think we can both agree sustainability was not being talked about, right? Yeah, and I interviewed these girls and they were like, yeah, we started talking about in high school. I was like, what? You know, so I have a lot of hope. So keep up the good work, girls.
Thank you, that was sweet.
Yeah, I echo that. I really do feel like it is, you know, both unfortunately and unfairly a burden that is landing on your generation to solve these really, really big and overwhelming problems. But at the same time, I feel like there are huge opportunities for innovation that are coming down the line. And I think it brings us back to fashion as a, as like a design solution, right? Like finding ways to work with constrained resources or work with the structures we have and to do things differently. And so that actually gives me a lot of hope and excitement, because I think it's actually opportunity. I mean, I feel immense guilt that this is being handed to your generation, but at the same time, I feel like there is a chance to to really create something different, which is a pretty beautiful thing.
I was also gonna say something. I mean, like whatever you said, and Sarah, absolutely. Like I am thrilled that you're interested in going into this field, and I'm can't wait to see what y'all are able to do. I think there's so much opportunity there, and everybody. I mean, sustainability is just becoming so important for all brands, big or small, and I'm so excited to see how things are going to change over the next few decades, and hopefully you all play a big part in that.
Yeah, that's awesome. If no one else has anything else to add or any last questions, I don't want to take up more of anyone else's time, though I'm sure I would love to hear you guys talk for ages. I would like to take a moment to thank all of our panelists again for taking the time to do this. We all appreciate it so much. Everyone can do like the little clapping emoji. I appreciate it so much. And all of you are each so insightful and intelligent and eloquent. And I could not show my thanks enough for you guys sharing all of your valuable insight and information with us all. And I would love to do this again next semester and pick your brains even more. But with that being said, I know we are 10 minutes over, so I'm going to go ahead and end this. Thank you guys so much again. I am going to drop in the chat everyone here, all their Instagrams, along with Fashion Revolution and Remake, which are two fashion advocacy groups that are amazing to follow if you want to keep up to date with everything within the sustainable fashion realm. So that resource is there. And with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of their night. It's really nice outside. Go outside while it's still sunny. But yeah, thank you guys so much. And thank you everyone for coming. But bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Happy
Thank you so
Day.
much. Thanks, everybody.